Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is Tuesday morning. Fall is definitely in the air. Uh, Today I'm wearing an old Quebec Nordique jersey. Quebec City is one of the most beautiful cities in North America. A lot of people don't know about. You feel like you're in somewhere between the old world and a Disneyland Fantasia with the beautiful castle-like fortresses and it's just the chateau. It's just gorgeous. Old cobblestone streets, and uh, there's probably no place in North America more eccentric and more on its own path and more old world. And yet it's retained that old world. So it's probably more old world than London or Paris now could ever be. So Quebec City is a pretty unique place. It housed an NHL team from the WHA merger in '79, the Nordiques, who were in the WHA in the '70s, a rival hockey league. And then they joined the NHL up until the mid '90s when they moved to Colorado and became the eventual Stanley Cup champions. I think three times now. They won last year, if I remember. Um, and the architect of that team right now is actually Joe Sakic, who was drafted by the Quebec Nordiques and played there for a few seasons before they moved off to Denver, Colorado. Denver's obviously a much bigger market, more of a television market, and hockey's very interested in having big American TV markets in their conglomerate, and they kind of ignore Canadian mid-sized markets that would have great rabid fan bases, but aren't the lucrative television contract negotiating uh, means. So I miss the Nordique. They were a great franchise. They had three Czechoslovakian, what's the word I'm looking for, ex-asylum seekers. That's not the right word, but in the '80s they had these three Stasny brothers. Peter Stasny, who was quite the star, and his brothers Marion and Anton Stasny, they played on the same line together, the three of them. I remember having the hockey cards of all three of them when I was a kid. Thought that was pretty exciting. La Coliseau, and Quebec's very French, especially Quebec City. Montreal is more bilingual, which is also in Quebec, but Quebec City is very French-centric, old world leaning. Bakeries, cafes, side streets. There's a part of old Boston. It's called South something, South Market maybe. There's a part of Boston's got a really old world neighborhood to it, but it's a very small part of the city. And in Quebec City, they haven't even allowed really a whole lot of skyscraper development there at all. There's probably four or five that went up in the '70s, maybe late '60s, modern kind of things. Then for the most part, they've pushed that stuff out to St. Foy now. But anyway, enough on the jersey. Progress here on the cafe. It's been in starts and stops, and it's a little frustrating. The plumbers hit a major obstacle. It's the fact that our coffee kitchen is being built the same place where this, as a bank in the first half of the 20th century, had its vault. And in order to support said vault, they had to build like an 18-inch thick concrete box beneath that room. And our plumbers are trying to drill like 6, 7 drains down through that floor. And it's 18 inches of concrete. And they have to come back with a core drill, which has water. And I mean, we might strike oil on this motherfucker. But so that's happening. I think tomorrow they're coming back. And hopefully once those holes happen, the plumbing will go in and things will move forward. I have picked up most of my kitchen appliances. And you'll see over there, there's sinks and fridges and freezers and panini makers and microwaves and toasters and hand sinks and dishwashing 3-compartment sinks. And I'm picking up a prep sink tomorrow. So pieces are still moving. It's just I was hoping to be open by now. And we're probably still a month away at least, which it's frustrating, but it's the nature of this beast in this industry. So, again, we're making progress. Things are dusty. And, of course, my 17-year-old was helping me yesterday by shop vacuuming up some mess we made, furring on a wall. So I'm like, shop vac up this dust and this sawdust. And the shop vac filter had fell off. And so this room filled up with dust. And luckily, most of my cabinets and records are locked away, and they're okay. My turntables were covered, but there's a layer of dust on just about everything else in here. And that's frustrating because all the stuff's been cleaned multiple times, but it will have to be again, especially with core drilling happening tomorrow. So you just got to kind of live with some of this stuff. It can be a little, like I said, frustrating, but I mean, at the end result's what we're after, and we'll be there soon enough, and this process will resolve itself. We're praying because it's been long, tedious, and exhausting, and not my strong suit. I'm comfortable talking music all day long with people, but dealing with contractors and calling people and following up and email, I don't mind doing it, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Dealing with the state and the health board and inspectors, ugh, it's nuts. Just open a small coffee shop. I mean, 100 years ago, you just would have said, I'm opening a coffee shop, put a sign out front and said, hey, coffee, 5 cents. You know, and you could bake your own stuff. We can't bake nothing here because the health codes and all that stuff. I mean, we can do microwave stuff. We can do soup warmers. We can do toasters. We can do the panini grill, but nothing that's vented. So that's where we're at, and we're making some progress. So I'm not going to play no records today. I'm not even going to uncover the turntables because, again, there's a lot more mess to come in the next few days here. So I'm going to keep things under wrap in terms of that. I do want to share a hidden treasure with you. 1 second. So this Hidden Classics series, it's, honestly could go on for hundreds of records. And it's just in my interpretation of the canon, records that I feel don't get quite the attention that they probably deserve, and other things that are very similar get tons of love. And it's so shaped today by the internet community, the YouTubers, the commenters, the reissue programs, what's being reissued. That's where the light's going. And stuff outside of that realm is fairly obscured and ignored and not validated, sadly. But Donald Byrd's one of the great legends of trumpet, a very modern, rhythmic, with roots in the blues and the gospel and the black church. Byrd's always been a fantastic player. And Byrd's work at Blue Note is prestigious and well regarded and treated with care and possessiveness by most people. Byrd's transition sides get a lot of recognition for a really small, obscure label. The Tunnel Byrd transition records certainly have some draw to them. So Byrd's career is certainly pretty well documented. But in the late 50s, he's not at Blue Note yet as a leader. He's 59 or 58, off to the races. He starts to make records as a leader there. He does work as a sideman, probably in 57 at Blue Note. But he's working with other people, including Gryce. And Gryce is a guy rooted in black tradition, the black church, the blues, very earthy in his composition and arrangements. There's a lot of echoes of the black church and a lot of what he does, the call and response of the preacher and the choir. You'll hear the blurts of horns echoing the amens of the congregation. I mean, it's just very connected to what is obviously one of his rocks in life, his religious foundation, because that's his tradition, that's his core beliefs. It's a place of comfort, a place of shelter, and probably a place too of reminiscing, thinking about your childhood with your parents, and the church has that value. And the black church is very interwoven into all black music, from Whitney Houston to Mariah Carey to Louis Armstrong to Duke Ellington. It's hard to extricate the black church from black music, the blues, and the church, very interwoven. The ba-la-ba, ba-dee-ba-wah, ba-la-da-da-da, ba-la-da-dee. The guitar and the vocal there, that's mimicking the preacher, I want to say, and the choir going, hallelujah. That back and forth. That space for dialogue, that space for conversation. It's not two people talking at the same time, which a lot of rock and roll became. If you listen to Metallica and Justice for All, the bass and the guitar and even the drums never speak to each other. They're all speaking over top of each other at the same time. And Justice for All, the bass actually has a bit of a mute on it, sadly. Probably wasn't the best example. But in rock and roll, the guitars and bass are kind of mimicking and echoing and on top of each other, and the drums are slamming, and Helter Skelter's like, cymbals are crashing, the bass is driving. Helter Skelter is funny how that's the heaviest version of Helter Skelter, even though that song was covered by a lot of so-called metal bands like Motley Crue and Aerosmith. U2 does it. I mean, you can't touch that original, the Ringo Starr cymbals smashing. I got blisters on my fingers. It's classic. But rock and roll gets away from that. Rock and roll starts there for sure, and that's why rock and roll, rhythm, and blues are so interwoven early on. They're very much from the same fabric. But rock starts to really deviate and become very much egocentric and interested in my own dialogue. And it's part of the natural progression of the music. It just happened. But the blues stayed very much in that vein of the church. And I think people need to be kind of reminded what that connection is. It's not like it's intangible. It's that communication, call and response. It's a very earthy connection and conversational style of art. But Gryce was very much interwoven with that fabric and was a brilliant mind. Sadly, he wasn't really appreciated much in his lifetime. He slipped into obscurity by the mid-'60s, and he might resurface briefly, or he might have actually just slipped into obscurity. I know it was a brief run for him as a leader and as a composer, even though he was highly regarded, and his fellow musicians loved what he did. He has a few records at New Jazz, part of the Prestige family, that are very rare and hard to come by and expensive, And those are some of those Japanese prestiges that if you want those Gigi Gryce, you just got to buy from Japan. Because finding them domestically is so difficult. Gotta blow my nose, allergy. It's probably one of the worst parts of this whole construction process is I have allergies to dust. I have a strong allergy to wood, sawdust. It's enough to keep me up at night, sawdust. Yeah, I've realized it more and more over the years that whenever I'm doing construction projects with my brothers or my dad back in the day, or helping my neighbor when he's helping me with stuff, when he skill saw some stuff, man, that night I'm going to have some wheezing and coughing and it's tough on me, sawdust. I have no idea how bad it was. But dust is not good, so even in here now, I can feel my eyes kind of... I'm also realizing a lot of the dust that bothers me comes in through my eyes. So I've been rinsing my eyes a lot more lately with eye rinse, and that's certainly helped. But so Gryce was a really creative player, and Gryce definitely lives in the shadows of the Blue Note legacy guys in terms of his popularity today. But he was highly regarded at the time. Him and Donald Byrd had a group together called the Jazz Lab. And their record at Columbia is fairly well distributed, known, has been repressed several times. I know you can find that one fairly easily, even old copies of it. Again, the distribution of a Columbia meant that there was probably 30, 40, 50,000 copies of that record out there versus the 5,000 of an old Blue Note Donald Byrd record. But so that record's not that tough to come by. And then there's a record at Jubilee they did together, which is also a nice little record. And I might as well just pull those up and show them to you, huh? This is the Columbia one. And I have a reissue of this that came out in the probably 2000s, early 90s, late 90s. Then I found an original of this not too long ago at a record store, $25. And it was at a record store in one of those little malls with a bunch of consignment vinyl. And probably someone didn't really know what this was. I think that's probably a little low for this great record by these great young men. But there's Gryce and there's Donald Byrd. And this one has... Does it have the rest of the band listed? I should know this, but I don't off the top of my head. I think Wendell Marshall's probably still part of this one. Maybe Wade Leggy as well. I'm not positive. But then they also do a great record at Jubilee, which is, again, one of those record labels that people kind of don't really know much about. Jubilee had a great run from about 1050 to about 1090. There's 30, 40 records in there that are really solid, including this Jazz Lab record, some Jazz Messenger stuff, some Jackie McLean, some John Coltrane with Ray Draper. There's some good stuff in there. But, again, the record doesn't seem to list the band on the top of my head here. But again, nice fine, 1059. The corner's nipped on this one. but it's a nice piece by a great group. But today I want to talk to you about their album on Riverside. Gigi Gryce and the Jazz Lab Quintet. And it's a beautiful old Riverside album. This has Wendell Marshall, Art Taylor on the drums, and Wade Legge on the piano. This is from 1957, March and February. And modern compositions with some, like I said, blues and gospel fringing. Great playing. Byrd is explosive and young and full of fire and just chomping at the bit with ideas. And Byrd's like a real giant of this time frame. It's just a great picture of these guys, Gryce and Byrd. They seem quite proud of themselves, right there's the two of them. And of course, Byrd's going to sign with Blue Note here shortly after and have that long career. And Gryce is going to sadly slip into obscurity. But for Riverside, this was a pretty important record. Riverside launches the 200 sequence in 1955. There's probably a handful of releases that rolls into 56. And that 200 sequence continues up to the late 50s, into the 300, into the 400s, eventually in the early 60s. And then that prestige sequence ends when Bill Grauer passes away and Oren Keep News, the label has to fold up. But there's a great run of records at Riverside from about 230 through about 350. It's an incredible legacy. And the Jazzland stuff has some great titles as well, even though some of that's licensed stuff, which is partly why some of that stuff was budget price, because it was being licensed from Europe and England and other places. But this is 229, and it's the beginning of some of the great titles at Riverside. And the earlier stuff before, there's just some great stuff. There's some Randy Weston, there's some Thelonious Monk. There might even be a Bill Evans that shows up here early. And there's a bit of a gap for a second one. I can't remember if the Evans is before or after this. But again, there's the great trombone player. It's slipping my mind now. Great trombone player. What's his name? Played with Ellington for a while. But anyway, and not Lawrence Brown. I can't think of his name. I can see the cover. But Riverside's really starting to come into their own. And this is one of their first great kind of hard bop gospel blues sessions that fits in with what's happening at Blue Note or at Prestige and kind of announces their arrival. Before this, Riverside's doing a lot of revival New Orleans, Dixieland stuff. They're tracking down all those great New Orleans legends and recording 10 inches and licensing European recordings of those guys. Which, most labels were doing that as well. Blue Note was doing that as well. Tracking down Bechet recordings from Paris and reissuing them as 10 inches. And then in the early 10-inch sequence at Riverside, there's a little bit of modern jazz in there that starts to show up. But it was in 55 when they signed Monk, who had done 2 records, couple sessions at Blue Note, a couple sessions at Prestige. They kind of both had slipped under the radar, those releases. They've since become highly renowned Blue Note Riverside Thelonious Monk records, but Monk hadn't really hit any kind of crest of popularity yet. It was Monk coming to Riverside that establishes Monk with that Ellington record, and then of course Brilliant Corners is shortly down the road, but it's also what establishes Riverside. And then Bill Evans, people think today Bill Evans was such a giant in terms of sales and stuff, but his first record sold like 200 copies in the first year, I've read. And Evans was very much unknown, working with the great George Russell, a very knowledgeable young player. He'd gone to school with people like Tony Scott, and so he had some pedigree and some knowledge, and working with George Russell is going to really propel you into another echelon in terms of your style and ability to read and play. But he was really unknown in his early days at Riverside, and it's, of course, when Miles Davis gets the yearning to do modal recordings, which was a George Russell thing, that he hires George Russell's pianist, Bill Evans, an unknown at the time, and of course becomes part of the kind of blues sessions that are infamous at this point, making Bill Evans a household name and changing the trajectory of his career, ultimately pulling Evans away from Riverside to Verve because of his popularity, and Verve threw some money at him. And his stuff at Verve is good, but it's not as good as his Riverside titles. Of course, Riverside wasn't long for this world anyway, so progress will happen no matter how much you try to stifle it. But it's a great session. Like I said, Byrd's just young and full of fire. Gryce is filled with ideas. You can tell he's got Ellington Sweets in the back of his mind. Like he's going to go someplace and do sacred conferences on the road had he been able to walk the path he had chosen, which we know obviously wasn't to be the case. But a lot of great up-tempo and mid-tempo stuff. I think there's one ballad on here. But it's fantastic stuff. It really is. And it's Byrd, like I said, is about to go to Blue Note. And that legacy of his is about to take off. But really, all three of these records are kind of hidden classics. You got Donald Byrd and Gigi Gryce. That's all you need to know that this is going to be a fantastic show tonight. And again, great photograph there on the old Columbia. And the Columbia, too, here at $9.98. It's nice to know these record labels well enough to be able to go to their discographies and know right about where that record is. What Columbia starts doing in the 900 sequence, right before they turn over to 1,000, Columbia really hits their high water mark right around that time. The Blakey stuff, they bring Miles in, Muggs coming a few years later. There's some great stuff happening at Columbia that's reaching the masses for the first time at this point. So anyway, that wraps up today. Coffee Shop Progress. Appreciate you all, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you want to support the channel in any way, please go to my Patreon page in the description below and pledge a few dollars a month. It always helps out and helps keep me on my feet. And Coffee Shop, hopefully a month or so, will be open. And that's probably going to change some of my scheduling with the channel as well. But it's by no means going to make it impossible to do it. It's probably going to give me more time to make the channel. And that's probably one of the biggest questions at this point is how busy are we going to be? You know what I mean? There's probably going to be times where it's pretty quiet and pretty dead. But there's also probably going to be times where it's the trendy and hot thing to do. So we're interested to see how that all plays out. Anyway, support the channel. Appreciate y'all. Like I said, subscribe, hit the like button, do all the other stuff you're supposed to do for the internet. I'm a 50-year-old white guy who isn't very internet savvy or on top of all that. What you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. But, I mean, we're here for the jazz knowledge and jazz conversation. So the rest of it, we're just kind of figuring it out as we go. I appreciate you all. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Peace.